Hello, and welcome to the Talented Amateurs podcast. My name is Joe Randolph, your host, and today we have Dennis Volpe, who is an executive performance coach and leadership consultant with Leadership Research Institute, where he is based in Auburn, New Hampshire, which is part of the greater Boston area. We're excited to have Dennis today. So, Dennis, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great, Joe. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to chat with you today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Absolutely. And Dennis, I know you and I work together. You were actually my executive coach with the company that I work for, and I really felt like the experience there. I really gained a lot of value from it, and it's really helped me as I've continued to grow in my senior leadership um, space. And part of today, I felt like I wanted to really uh, talk to you about more about your background, what executive coaching is, and just give people a understanding what are the benefits of it. And so hopefully as we go through today, we'll be able to dive into some of those elements and really get a good understanding of what this industry and what this profession is. So let's get started, and maybe let's just kick off and just tell us a little bit about who you are, and who is Dennis Volpe. I know you're a man of many talents, and obviously that you've served our country. So tell us who you are, and just let's start there.
Sure. First and foremost, I'm a husband, and then I'm a dog dad, and then I'm an outdoor enthusiast. So enjoy the outdoors. I'm a student of resilience. Um, I'm a bourbon drinker, but I'm also a mentor. I'm a coach, and I'm a retired military officer. And I'm really, when I think about who I am, um, I'm someone who is committed to making the lives of other people better.
Awesome. Now, thank you for that. So you're a bourbon drinker. What's your bourbon of choice these days?
Buffalo Trace.
Buffalo Trace. Very good. I have to point you to a podcast. They actually profile and talk about different bourbons and beers, it's brews, and so I have to point you to it because they've put me onto uh, a few bourbons and a few drinks. Blade and Bow is one that I'm trying to get acclimated to, but you
I like
know
it.
very good. So you're currently working with the Leadership Research Institute as an executive coach. Talk to us about how did you get started in executive coaching? Can you talk to us more about how you got into this profession?
Sure. I like to say by two random conversations, one that I had and then one that my wife had. And when I was transitioning from military service, trying to figure out, hey, what's next? What do I need to think about? And had lunch with a really good friend who was in the learning and development space. And we sat there, had lunch, and she asked me, what are you thinking about doing? And I'm like, I'm not sure. And she said, you need to think about getting into executive coaching. And I'm like, well, what is that? Because I had no idea what it was. When I was on instructor duty at the Naval Academy, I was a rugby coach. I was a college rugby coach, so that's kind of what I knew about coaching. And then she kind of explained what it was, and I realized that I had some background in that and some experience in it as a military officer, more from a mentorship perspective than a coaching perspective. So that was one, and the other one was somebody was asking my wife a very similar question. Hey, what is your husband going to do when he retires? And she said, well, he's pretty energized by this whole personal leadership thing. And so he's looking to do that. And that's when who she was talking to said, well, you need to talk to someone else because that's what her husband does. Her husband is a partner in this company called the Leadership Research Institute. So my wife had a conversation and then connected me with one of the partners at LRI, and that's how I got into the space.
Got it. Now, you do executive performance and transition coaching. Talk to us about just some of the areas of focus that you work with your clients on, and maybe give us a little bit more insight in terms of just those focus areas that you do derive from within your sessions with your clients.
Sure. And I'll open it up to you too, since we actually work together. But what do I look at? Well, first of all, what is coaching? And I don't. For me, having done it in the sports arena and now doing it in the personal and professional arena, I think it's the same. It's all about unlocking human performance. And when you unlock human performance, what are you trying to do? Well, one, you have to identify reality. And then you have to identify the objective. And then you've got a gap in between where we're at right now to where we want to go. And then you spend time identifying those barriers that exist, whether those barriers are internal or external. And then developing a plan to get from where we're at today to where we want to go tomorrow. That's what coaching is all about.
Okay. And when and obviously when you say the actual, when you talk about the what's the current reality and what's the plan, how do you how do you manage some of the reactions to maybe some of the feedback or some of the plans that you put together for some of your clients? Because obviously everyone will not be receptive to feedback. Feedback is a gift, and your role is to really dig into the blind spots and really help uncover some of these things. How do you balance that, and what's been some of the nuances and how you help executives and leaders move past those barriers where they may not feel like those barriers exist, or they may not have that vulnerability to accept that those barriers exist?
No, and that's a great question, Joe. I appreciate it. One, people have to be ready to be coached. If they're not ready to be coached, then coaches can't really help them.
Right.
So that's one. But the I think the other question you're asking is, how do you dig into some of those issues that may exist? And part of that is through having gone through a coaching program. I went through the Columbia Executive Coaching Program, which is based on human performance, and provided some academic insight, but also a coaching methodology that allows you to dive into what is going on with somebody, what matters to somebody, and then what they're going to do about it. So it's really about creating awareness for a person and then creating motivation around that awareness in order to get that person into action.
Got
But
it.
if someone's not ready for that, as a coach, it's really tough to get somebody to move in that direction.
Got you.
So, it's a push and a pull,
Hmm.
but that individual has to be ready to gain that understanding and put in the work in order to move to that next chapter.
Okay. And no, and I know when you and I, when I work with you, one of the things that you talk to me about is sometimes you just got to get out of your own head, and that's half the battle. And when you think about some of the leaders and executives that you work with, what have you seen as some of those key areas of growth that has allowed those leaders to scale to high performance? Are there any certain characteristics or certain attributes that you've been able to see that helps them move from point to point, from this stage of performance to this next tier?
Yeah, no, great question, Joe. Now that I've been in the coaching space for about almost 5 years now, there's a couple of trends I think that talk to exactly what you just asked. And the first one is self-awareness, increasing self-awareness around what really matters, personally and professionally. and what really matters, spending time on what you value, what you want to prioritize, and what your expectations are of you and those around you, both personally and professionally. Understanding that there's a difference between change and transition, right? Change is what happens to us. Transition is what we do about it, right? And I know you and I have talked a lot over the past, couple of weeks, couple of months, and you've had a lot of change in your life,
Yes.
personally and professionally.
Right.
And, transition is what you're going to do about it, right? It's a mindset, it's a process. So understanding that, we are going to get knocked down in this life, but it's what you do when you get back up.
Absolutely.
And first is making a decision that you're going to get back up. And then what are you going to do? What are you going to have in terms of a learner or growth mindset to say, what did I learn from that experience to make me better? And then resilience versus endurance. Understanding that, endurance is our ability to just put our head down and just keep going and going and going until the battery is completely empty, which is not good. Right. Personally, professionally, mentally, physically, and all that. Resilience, on the other hand, is having that self-awareness around our energy level, physically, mentally, socially, and spiritually, and then knowing how to plug yourself back in. How do you relax? How do you recharge? How do you reconnect? And how do you re-engage life mentally, physically, socially, and spiritually? So that way you can lean into challenges, you can lean into adversity and be better from that experience, which all leads to self-management. Being able to self-manage is what really helps high performers to reach that next level. And I think the biggest one, and I was absolutely guilty of this, and sometimes still am, is this innate fear to ask for support. To really, truly embrace the understanding that life is a team sport and you're not going to get to that next level without a team.
Got it. And thank you for those. And one of the things I'm especially with the last one, the fear to ask for support, and I'm curious to understand as you see the ones that are able to have that self-awareness, understand, what that change to transition looks like. But there's also that other end where, you may have executives or coaches or leaders rather that sometimes they still can avoid these pitfalls and that derail their performance, whether they fail to ask for help. Most senior people, sometimes they feel like if they ask for help is a sign of weakness. But what have you seen or how do you coach leaders to help keep them or from derailing? And what are some of the things that you see that are common that they usually do that may keep them from moving to that next tier and allows them not to be as successful?
So what prevents them or what allows them?
Well, what prevents them? Because I think sometimes we know the things that work well, but what are some of the things we need to avoid that you've seen where it just derailed performance and it hasn't allowed them to move the dial?
Yeah, well, no, and you highlighted it at the beginning, and it's that self-awareness piece. It's understanding who you are and how you're doing in terms of being open to feedback and understanding that, guess what? Our awareness of our intent might be completely different than our awareness of our impact. Because what we think we're doing as leaders may not be actually what we're doing to the people that are part of our team, whether that's our personal team at home or our professional team at work. And being open to the feedback of others and getting the perspective of others is absolutely vital to success. And you said, you talked about the whole ego thing, and I'm a big fan of Ryan Holiday, and he's got his trilogy, and the second book in the trilogy is Ego is the Enemy, and that is absolutely true. And, I've been guilty of that myself.
Yep.
And, it's something that I still have to get out of my own way with. But understanding that, one, when we look at our performance, very often we're not as good as we think we are.
That's true.
And we're also not as bad as we think we are.
That is also true. Yes. Yeah, and I think I follow Ron Holiday. I get a lot of his emails regarding each some of his daily affirmations, and ego is obviously one. And when you think about the range of leaders and executives, what do they fall in terms of relative range? Is it director and level up? And do you see a difference in the different levels as you coach across director, maybe to senior executives, EVPs, or have you seen similar patterns across no matter the level of the executive or the leader?
So I've been blessed, I'll use the word blessed, to have the opportunity to coach across the entire spectrum. So from emerging leader, that first or second year consultant, all the way up to the director level. So I've gotten to see people at different points in their career, and different points in their personal and professional journey. And I don't want to say it's always, because I don't, but very often it's the same stuff. It's the blocking and tackling. It's understanding emotional intelligence, understanding empathy, understanding that other people matter, and you have to pay attention not only to you but those around you in order to be successful. But I would also argue that, why does that not happen? Because of what gets rewarded. Very often we don't reward connection, we reward competence. So until that changes, you're always going to have this cognitive dissonance that exists. You look at situations that are currently going on because of the pandemic, and you have companies that are awarding CEOs, $25 million bonuses, and they're firing or laying off. Sorry, we can't say firing. They're laying off 50% of their workforce.
Right.
What kind of message does that send about connection and empathy and emotional intelligence?
Got it. Yeah, and I think you said some trigger words, and I think empathy is one of them. And I as leaders, we have to be able to lead with empathy because it allows us to show up different, allows people to respond to us different, and even in this new environment, and as we continue to change or continue to see more adjustments based and from COVID, it's going to be key. So it takes me into maybe one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about as you see the field of executive coaching and as it's expanding. What do you see as the future of this industry, and how are you adjusting to now COVID, where you probably already you were virtual in anyway, so it may not have been that big of adjustment, but how do you see the field of executive coaching expanding, and what are some of some of those nuances that we'll probably see over the next 2 to 3 years in this profession?
Well, I think, for me personally, I've done a lot of my coaching, as you said, virtually. So not a lot of change, except for, I really like the in-person connection up front. Um, and from a coaching perspective, I think that's useful. I think it's powerful. Um, so that way, that you're really connected with that person. And I think that we have seen, over the past year or so, that virtual connection, while you can get connected, if you had that physical connection, that in-person connection up front, that virtual connection would be that much more powerful. So I think that's going to be part of the expansion of executive coaching, that coaches are going to have to put more effort into how do you really connect with the people that you work with, and that you support. when you can't necessarily do it in person up front. So there's going to be a lot of energy expenditure to make that connection, to establish that relationship so people can move forward. Do I see coaching expanding? I do. Um, and the reason I do is because of all of the things that you have seen over the past year in terms of how do I, one of the biggest things, and I think it's what executive coaches are going to be dealing with is the work from home environment and how that environment is more taxing on leaders and professionals. Because prior to the pandemic, most of us had trouble establishing and reinforcing and setting our boundaries. Boundaries are very, very blurred. So, how do you keep that routine that allows you to relax and recharge and reconnect when the boundaries are blurred and sometimes the boundaries are not being respected by leaders and leadership teams?
Yep. I'm a firm believer that COVID is gonna be the one or two things. As leaders, is going to help them really enhance their ability to communicate, connect, and build the rapport in a different way that they're not used to. Where in person, it's just a little easier to do. It's easier to coach and drive performance, but also try to motivate. But in a virtual environment, you have to do it a little different. You have to try different things. And one of the things I felt like what could occur as a benefit from this, and I think anytime you have a crisis like that, there's always some benefits that you can take from it, is when we get back to the face to face, it allows that level of communication to be a little bit more effective. And or on the flip side, it also may expose some of those leadership gaps that leaders may have where they couldn't communicate in person, and it's even more highlighted in a virtual space where that lack of communication, lack of building rapport, lack of building a team and driving performance is exposed even more. And so I think as we continue to move through the pandemic, I think those will be some really interesting data insights that we can take from some of the learnings from this space. Even myself as a leader, obviously I moved from more of a global role where I was having to manage virtually and do this across different time zones. But even in this new space where my team is in a total different city, in a totally different state, and I had to think about different ways to keep them challenged and motivated, and also protect them from themselves, because people feel like when they're virtual, they have to work harder. And I think even as leaders, we have to model behavior that we want them to do. So I think it's going to be uh, a lot of learnings from this. And as leaders, it's going to really expose the things that we do really well, but it also is going to expose the things that we need a lot more work on
Yeah,
in
I think
terms
you're
of what we do.
spot on, Joe. I think you're spot on.
So, one of the trends, one of the things that I wanted to really uh, think about people that are looking to move into this space, and maybe this let's shift to uh, how people can, take it, get into this profession. And if you and as you see, and I hear a lot of people that want to get into coaching, what advice would you give someone that's looking to pursue this field?
Um, a lot of it is your choice, and what do I mean by that? Um, because I get approached often when it sounds like you do too. Hey, I'm interested in going into coaching. How can I become a coach? And it may sound flippant, but it's not, because there's really no standard for entry into the coaching profession. So I say, well, if you really want to be a coach, you can do it while we're talking. Change your LinkedIn profile and say you're a coach. Do I recommend that? No. Um, because I think to be an effective coach, to be an impactful coach, you have to think about three things. And one is your credibility. You don't necessarily have to have done the exact same thing as that person, but have you actually walked the walk? Have you actually done the work? Well, call yourself a leadership coach, but you never led a team. Call yourself a resilience coach, but you never had to be resilient. And I think the list goes on and on and on. So credibility is one. Credentials is another. For me, I came from an environment where credentials matter. In the military, knowing your job, knowing your stuff, and tactical and technical expertise was a requirement. I think the same is true in the coaching profession. And that's why I went through the Columbia coaching program. And I was deciding between Columbia and Georgetown because they were two academic programs that not only challenged me from a methodology standpoint, but provided the insight and perspective that I needed to have the confidence that I wanted in order to have coaching conversations with leaders like you. Are there other ways you can do it? Yeah, there's online courses. There's pay to play kind of programs. But when you think about it, you have a choice about your credentials. And do you want it to be from an impactful and reputable organization, or do you just want to get into the space? And that's a choice. And then who do you want to work with? Because one of the questions you were going to ask is what have I learned in the past 5 years as a coach? Well, that I am not the coach for everybody. And understanding who you want to work with and why and how you can impact them is important. Because as a coach, you can't be all things to all people. And very often when you get started, you try to be all things to all people because you want to get paid, right? But spending time saying, hey, you know what? These are the people or organizations that I want to work with, because based on my strengths, based on what energizes me, based on the issues or problems that matter to me, and based on my skills, my knowledge, and my expertise, this is where I can make the best impact, is important. So the three things to consider being your credibility, your credentials, and your clients.
Got it. Okay. Very good. I love that. And I think I think those are uniquely important. And you see, obviously you have people that also confuse mentoring with being a credential coach. And that's fine. If you've been a leader and you've been an exec, and I've know of executives that had illustrious careers. But as you know, and this is part of why I wanted to get into, what have you learned about yourself in this process? It's one thing to go and get the credentials, but it's also the applied practice.
Oh,
And I think that also is part of the growth. So maybe since you kind of mentioned it, let's talk about, what have you learned about yourself in this process? And and as you've evolved into this space.
well, and it's funny that you brought up the mentorship piece because two big questions that I've gotten recently, Joe, was, well, what's the difference between consulting and coaching? And what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? And can you do both? Can you be a consultant and a coach? Yes, you can. I am. But it's where is the focus, right? As a consultant, the focus is on the problem. As a coach, the focus is on the person. And as a consultant, you solve other people's problems. As a coach, you help other people solve their own problems.
Right.
And what is a mentor? And you highlighted it, but a mentor is somebody who's done the things that you want to do in the way you want to do them, so they could provide that insight and perspective that you need. But guess what? A consultant also provides insight and perspective. So does a coach, but it depends on where the spotlight's on.
Right.
Right? As a consultant, the spotlight's on the problem. As a coach, the spotlight is on the person. And sometimes from a mentorship perspective, the spotlight's on the mentor, because
Right.
you're providing your story, your journey, and how it relates to that person.
Got it.
And what have I learned? I need to be more curious, because going from a coach role to a consultant role is significantly easier than going from a consultant role to a coach role. And when I think about my previous career as a military officer, I was a problem solver. You can call me a government consultant, if you will, right? Because that's what we got paid to do as military officers. We got paid to solve problems. So, the Michael Bungay Stainer quote, right? How can you be curious for 30 more seconds? That's the biggest thing that I've learned, is curiosity provides connection. And that connection is what ultimately gets someone to success, because with that curiosity and connection, that's when that awareness happens. That's when that exploration happens. And then that's when that focused action based on what somebody values, what they want to prioritize, and what they really expect of themselves and others happens. It's through curiosity and connection.
Awesome. No, I love it. Curiosity, and it's also part of the learning process, right? I think the more we can be curious, it helps with that learning and then awareness. So that's awesome. Anything else, and as you've kind of went through this journey, that you've noticed about yourself, and have you been able to apply it outside of your profession as you've learned? For example, as I've kind of dove into just some of the podcasting, it made me think about how I ask questions different, how I talk to people different, particularly in my work, and sometimes being able to have that conceptual thinking and how do you ask questions to foster that type of environment. So is there anything else that you've learned across the journey since you've been navigating this space?
Well, the question piece is super powerful. And why is that? Because to your point, how you ask questions impacts the answer. When you start thinking about strategic questioning, well, the shorter the question, the more strategic it is, and the more space you give someone else. Versus, well, Joe, tell me about what's going on. That's a strategic question. Joe, tell me what's going on. Is it this? Is it this? Is it that? Or something else? So you took that strategic question and then made it tactical, because now Joe has to put his answer in one of those 4 boxes.
Gotcha.
And understanding what it really means to give somebody space to answer a question. Because what are you trying to do? You're really trying to allow somebody to unpack their pack, in a pack that may not have been unpacked before.
Got it.
So they need space to do that. And giving individuals space to do it is important. And I would say the other, piece that I learned through my journey that I utilize in my coaching practice is how important that resilience formula is. And the resilience formula that I like to use that's in my book, Transition on Purpose, is mind, body, tribe, and why. So making mindfulness and mental health part of your everyday. Making your body, your physical wellness part of your everyday.
Got it.
Making social connection part of your everyday. and then understanding your purpose and making sure that you're energizing yourself around what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because when you have a sense of purpose that's aligned with your strengths, what energizes you, and the problems that you want to solve, and the people you want to solve them with, that's what's going to allow you to be mentally tough. That's what's going to allow you to have the grit that you want to keep moving forward to that next peak.
Got it. Now, so one of the things I'm always I like to understand is how do other people learn, and your role is to help people grow and learn and understand more about themselves. But how do you continue to evolve as an executive coach with new practices? There's always new methodologies. There's a new leadership methodology that comes out probably once every quarter or so. But how do you continue to learn and continue to build your acumen and really ensure that you're also, while you're focusing on others' development, how do you focus on yours?
No, and I appreciate the question because I think it goes back to that credibility piece. Are you walking the walk that you're taking your clients on? And one of my top personal values is connection, being connected with people who are going to challenge me to be better today than I was yesterday. And what does that look like in practice? Well, I'm part of a bunch of mastermind groups that look at, one is with other Columbia coaches. So we meet on a regular basis to talk about coaching trends, to talk about different things that are happening in the coaching profession. And oh, by the way, we actually coach each other and critique each other on how well we're coaching. And so that's part of it. I'm part of a leadership speaker series that brings leadership practitioners and thought leaders in the leadership development space. I'm in a mastermind group of talent professionals that talk about, well, what does the talent industry in terms of bringing in top talent, developing top talent, retaining top talent, and advancing top talent, what does that look like? And I read a lot, and one of the cool parts about the International Coaching Federation, which is the international governing body for coaching, there's also a requirement for continuing education, and I'm a professional certified coach, so there's a requirement for me to do that, and so I surround myself with people who are going to challenge me to be better. I make sure that I'm in the proximity of people who are going to make me think differently. I spend time with the Columbia Coaching Network because we get together usually once or twice a month for virtual connections that provides the space for coaches to not only interact, but provide knowledge in their areas of expertise.
Okay. And I think that's important because, obviously we have to always continue to put our mask on first before we can help others. And I think the continuous learning is it keeps us sharp, keeps us on top of our profession, but it also keeps us in a space where we can show up as our best self and our best version for the people that we support, the people that we're coaching, and the people that we're developing. So thank you for that. Sounds like some pretty nice groups. The mastermind group seems pretty interesting. So um, looking forward to your continued growth from that. You mentioned your book earlier, Transition on Purpose, and I know. Talk to us about that process and what made you decide to write a book, and where can we find it? I just want to make sure, because you mentioned that and I didn't, and I wanted to circle back to that. But Transition on Purpose, talk to us about that.
So first, you can find it on Amazon. So Transition on Purpose. You can find it on Amazon, and you can get a hard copy, or you can get an electronic copy. Um, excuse me. Why did I write it? Well, I wrote it for a couple of reasons. One, I had a bunch of mentors tell me I should. So I I spent some time reflecting on, well, why are they telling me to write this book? So it goes back to that feedback piece. And well, I have an interesting story to tell. It's interesting, it's personal, but it's not unique, right? It's a story about it's also about failing and what that does to you uh, mentally, and what it means to be resilient. So what it feels like to be successful. You know what's required to be successful, but you also know what it feels like to fail. But what's required to be resilient, live a resilient life and not be a failure. That's what the book's about. And it provides a coaching framework or a coaching methodology to coach yourself or to work with a coach to get you from where you're at to where you want to go. And it looks at reality. It looks at values. It looks at your priorities. It looks at what you want in your life in terms of your constraints and your restraints. What energizes Joe? What de-energizes Joe? What do we have to make sure is part of the everyday experience? What needs to be fenced off and reduced? And then how do we make sure that mindfulness is part of our reality? Physical wellness is part of our reality, social connection and purpose. And then building your network of people who are going to challenge you to be better, and then who are going to energize you. And having a personal, I call it a QRF, your quick reaction force. Those 5 or 10 people in your life that you could call on the phone and get the insight and perspective that you want, but the accountability that you need to be a better human each and every day. Because we are going to get knocked down, but it's all about getting back up and re-engaging life. That's what resilience is all about. So that's what the book's about. And I do some pro bono work with 2 organizations. One is Camp Resilience up here in New Hampshire, whose mission is to work with military veterans and first responders to get them back, leveraging the outdoors to do that. And then I also work with Camp Southern Ground down in outside of Atlanta, Fayetteville, Georgia.
Okay.
And they have 2 military veteran transition programs that I work with as well. And all of the proceeds from the sale of that book are going to be donated to those 2 organizations.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the book. I know that's, it's not an easy process. And first, I just want to just congratulate you on the book. Haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's on my reading list. I got quite a few that I got teed up, but
well, I still need to send you a signed copy, by the way, Joe.
Absolutely. But congratulations on that accomplishment. And as Dennis mentioned, we can find that on Amazon. So if you are looking to purchase, and we'll get those details out as well. So thank you. As we start to move to wrap up, what do you have on the radar for this year? Any projects or initiatives that you're driving that you would like to share?
The first one is I'm actually looking at doing some experiential coaching. And what does that look like? Looks like one-on-one coaching, or maybe small group coaching in the outdoors, leveraging the outdoors of the great granite state of New Hampshire, And you know what? Sometimes you just need to get out of the house or out of the office and have real conversations about real things in real life. And why not do that in the outdoors? So that's figuring out how to make that happen is something that I'm looking at. The other area of focus for me, and it's based on what I saw over the past year or so, is doing more coaching in the small business arena. Because one thing that I have learned during my experience as a military officer and now as a coach, and then have watched what has happened during the pandemic, um, leadership can be a very lonely place. And it could be a very lonely place, particularly if you're a small business owner or an entrepreneur who's trying to, you know, get their side hustle into their main hustle, or their, main hustle off the ground. And providing small business owners an opportunity to gain insight, gain perspective, and gain accountability is an area of focus for me. And if I can do that with small business owners or entrepreneurs who are also military veterans or first responders, I'd get even more energized by that opportunity. And I've gotten asked recently, and when we conclude this call, I'll probably have some questions for you, Joe. I've been told that you may want to consider doing a podcast. So I don't know where I sit with that one. I know I'm more energized by the first two than I am the third one. But those are the three things that are on my radar.
Awesome. Looking forward to some of that, and we can definitely talk more about the third one. I think you'll be great. I think you got a great story, and I think you can add a lot of value to people, and that's why I want to bring you on mine, because I feel like you are someone who can add value. So very good. So we'll definitely talk more about that. As we start to close, I like to leave my audience with three things before we go. If there was anything that they took from this 45 minutes to an hour from this episode, if they didn't take anything from this podcast, other than the three things that you want to leave them with, what are those three things that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up today?
Three things. First one, embrace the fact that life is hard and you're going to get knocked down from time to time. But it's what you do when you get knocked down that matters the most. And learn from that opportunity. Embrace that opportunity. Lean into it. That's number one. Two, actions speak louder than words. So do something. And the last one is, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, life is a team sport. Realize that you can't do it by yourself, and surround yourself with amazing people who will challenge you to be better today than you were yesterday. Because if you want to be amazing, surround yourself with amazing people.
Awesome. I love that. So embrace life is hard. What are you going to do about it? Actions speak louder than words. So I always say, it's your deeds and not your words that I will pay attention to. And then life is a team sport. Build a team around you and leverage the strengths of everyone to ensure that you don't have to go at it alone. So thank you for those three tips. Tell us how to find you, Dennis. Give us your social medias, your LinkedIn. I know you do some awesome videos on LinkedIn. So tell us how to find your social medias, websites, and obviously reinforce where we can find the book.
Sure. Transitiononpurpose.com. You can absolutely find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can get Transition on Purpose on Amazon.
All right. So Dennis, as we wrap up, first, I want to thank you for joining us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. As always, you always leave me with tips and insights and things that I need to think about and continue to reinforce. So thank you for sharing with us today and really pouring into us your knowledge and your wisdom and your insight. And for my audience, hope you really enjoyed this episode. We'll provide Dennis's information so that you can go and purchase his book, or if you in the space where you need an executive coach to really help you move from one level of performance to the next. He's an excellent coach. I personally work with him. So we'll also make sure that you get his information. So if you want to take advantage of his services and his expertise and just knowing him in general, and he's a great guy, we'll definitely make sure you have that. So thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoy the episode.